Welcome to the Gooners podcast, Mike. The run is over.
The run is over. The run is over. But you know what? It had to end eventually, and we'll get to all of that. How are you feeling? It's a season of sickness. I understand you haven't been well. Hope you're wearing a surgical mask. I don't want to catch what you had over Skype.
You know, the son brought the stomach bug into the house. You're teaching kids to share. You don't want them to share everything. And he did, but otherwise doing well.
I assumed it was some bad lasagna or something like that. But
yeah, God knows what it was.
Enough of this light banter, though, because we want to get into this podcast. We've been looking forward to this for a long time. Andy, one of the many services we perform on this podcast, and there are many, is to help our guests enjoy a stress-free hour, kind of talking about our beloved Arsenal, get their mind off of whatever external things might be occupying it. And, I know our special guest this week has been a little busy with some things outside of Arsenal, but I don't really know what they are. But we're honored that he's been taking some time to kick back and talk about Arsenal and football with us for an hour. So we're going to introduce you. We've done about 110 of these podcasts now, Andy, and we've had great guests on. We've had former players, respected journalists, non-respected journalists, but we've also had plenty of guests who have been neither right nor honorable. But today we have a guest who is both right and honorable. We're joined by the Right Honourable John Bercow MP, Speaker of the United Kingdom House of Commons. Welcome to the Gooners podcast, John.
Thank you very much indeed. Mike and Andy, it's a pleasure to engage with you.
Well, it's a pleasure to be engaged by you. So now Andy doesn't sound like it, and you probably don't know this, John, but he's actually English, born and bred. I am quite a bit not English.
I think I figured that.
But just so our listeners know, we have been authorized to call you John. So I'm not just being an ugly American who thinks everybody is on a first name basis with me. So don't give me a break on that. But thank you very much for that, John. And another thing that you and Andy have in common, besides being English, is that you both selected the same name for your sons. I'm guessing you didn't name yours after Giroud, though.
No, I can't claim that that my wife named our son after Olivier Giroud, because apart from anything else, our son was born in December 2003, and Giroud didn't feature in my mind at that time. He wasn't playing for Arsenal. But yes, we have got a son called Oliver. We've got two other children, but our eldest son is called Oliver, and as it happens, he, with me, has a season ticket to Arsenal, and like me, he very rarely misses a home game at the Emirates.
Excellent. And there's no Olivier Giroud thought in our naming either.
It was just a coincidence that he got the assist in the FA Cup and then your son was born. Anyway, today is the first of a series of podcasts that we're just going to only have guests on the podcast who have sons named Oliver. So,
well, congratulations to Andy, by the way, before we
you.
touch on the important matter of Arsenal. Many congratulations to you, Andy, and
thank you.
I hope that your Oliver brings you and your wife or partner as much joy as ours brings to us.
Oh, he does every day. It's a blessing. He
does every day except for Sunday when you spent 24 hours vomiting. Because
yes, that's true. That's true.
His son. I've met his son. His son is adorable. I don't know. We have questions as to the legitimacy, but anyway, we have a long-standing tradition on the podcast where every time a long undefeated streak ends, we invite on the Speaker of the House of a large governmental body. If you remember back in 2007, Andy, when our 28-game undefeated streak ended, remember when we had Nancy Pelosi on? We talked about Arsenal for hours and hours.
Is Nancy Pelosi an Arsenal fan?
Oh, no, I have no idea. I doubt she has any idea that the Premier League exists, but nor will we be doing our podcast in 2007. But
okay.
So we're beginning a new tradition here anyway. But
okay.
We always like to find out the background whenever we have somebody on for the first time, how they became an Arsenal supporter. I do a little bit of research. I try to be prepared about your youth and early days. And to me, it seems a little intriguing in your case. I mean, if I may, it seems that you were raised Jewish and in Middlesex, no less. And so the obvious question here is how you lucked into falling in love with Arsenal instead of that other lot down the road.
Well, I was born at Edgware General Hospital, and Edgware falls into Middlesex, but I was brought up in Woodside Park, which is North London, and then Mill Hill, which is North London, and I went to school in North London. And the short answer to your question is that there were really two influences on me. One was that a family friend, the father of my sister's best friend, was a very keen Arsenal devotee. He now and again went to matches, and on one occasion, with my parents' permission, he took me, I believe, to a match. And I remember watching the FA Cup final with him in May 1971 when we won the double. And by then he had already enticed me into football and persuaded me of the merits of Arsenal. So that was a factor. But that first factor was, in a sense, if you will, reinforced by a second factor, and that was that my sister used to go swimming, and in particular to do synchronized swimming, ballet in the water, in baths in Islington, where, not surprisingly, virtually everybody who had a football allegiance was an Arsenal fan. So the combination of the family friend on the one hand, luring or enticing me into an interest in football, and on the other hand, the fact that where my sister swam, everybody was an Arsenal fan, they were close to the ground, they were passionate about soccer, really made the choice not a choice at all. Arsenal was irresistible to me, and I had the impression of the team as between them and the other team from North London, whose name I temporarily forget, whom I think of as a team from Middlesex. Arsenal just seemed to me to be stronger, more powerful, more dominant, more assertive, and, to put it very simply, better. And so I became an Arsenal fan aged 8, and I've never looked back. And although I've only been a season ticket holder for a variety of reasons since 2012 with my son, you know, I very rarely miss a home game, and I've been a passionate follower, largely from a distance, but over the last 6.5 years in person, of the club. And it's very much part of my life, and it's written into my DNA to be an Arsenal fan, and I can do no other.
As it should be. I mean, that seems to be the common thread amongst us, is that it just takes over, and there is no alternative. So, do you remember the first game you attended? Was it in Highbury? Was it? Do you remember the opponent and kind of the circumstances?
I remember going to a match on a Saturday afternoon between Arsenal and Manchester United, which Arsenal won, if memory serves me correctly, 3-0, and that would have been around 1972 or possibly as late as 73. I haven't checked. Perhaps I should have checked in readiness for this podcast, but I haven't done. But it was in one of those seasons, and I don't think I've got false memory syndrome. I'm pretty certain that we won the game 3-0, and I went with a couple of guys who were from the Islington area, and I think they managed to get tickets. I remember we did have seats, and I seem to recall going with 2 adults, and I think that was the first game I attended. I also then subsequently went to a number of games that were derby games, Arsenal-Tottenham matches, where I literally had to clamber up, almost climbing onto some sort of podium and holding on to a fence in order to see, with my father standing in the background, totally unversed in the game and with not the slightest interest other than a desire to see me enjoy myself. So the fact that Dad couldn't see in the days when there were lots of places that were taken in the stands by people standing didn't matter to him at all. He had managed to get tickets, perhaps as a birthday present or something of that sort. So I do remember going to a couple of derby matches. And the first 2 games that I remember not going to, but watching extracts from, were the match at White Hart Lane where we won the league, where, again, if memory serves me correctly, I think a draw would have sufficed, but we managed to get a late goal and win 1-0, and that was the year, of course, that we won the double. And I didn't see that game. I don't think that was on television live, but I remember seeing on the late news before I went to bed that Arsenal had clinched victory and won the league at White Hart Lane, a regular refrain at the Emirates, as you know, to this day. We won the league at White Hart Lane. So that game I remember. And I also remember, of course, the 1971 FA Cup final. You know, my head was in my hands. I was miserable, I think in tears. when we went 1-0 down, it was a galling experience. And I thought, oh no, this is wretched. And then, of course, we got the equaliser. I think at the time people thought that it was George Graham, but in fact it was Eddie Kelly who equalised for the Gunners. And I will remember, I must say to both of you, of course, as you do, I'm sure you do, I will remember to my dying day Charlie George's winner for Arsenal, and then lying prostrate
Yep.
on the pitch in glorious celebration of an amazing achievement. And so, you know, I will never forget that. Those are very, very, very happy Arsenal memories. Not my only Arsenal memories, but amongst the happiest and obviously the longest memories.
We were lucky enough on a tour of the Emirates a few years ago that was led by Charlie George to have Charlie George pose in front of that picture of him in the entranceway to where the players and coaches walk in from the car park, to just posing next to him, kind of replicating his lying on the ground, although he wasn't lying on the ground during the picture. But lovely man, Charlie George.
He's got a very good sense of humor, don't you think?
Excellent, and he seems to really love. I mean, it must be repetitive. It must be, you know, sometimes mind-numbing to do that day after day after day, to give Legends tours at the Emirates. But he seems to, I mean, you can't tell it from looking at him on the day.
Well, I think the biggest tribute to him, I entirely agree with you, is that I went on that tour. I didn't have the picture that you had, so I can't say that I shared that experience. But I did go with my son about 3 years ago on that tour with him, and he does it with great good humour and with wonderful grace. And what more can you ask? As you say, you know, it's quite a repetitive experience from his point of view, but, you know, he doesn't give anything other than an impression of enjoyment of the experience and contentment to be in one's company. And, you know, that's not always the case with people who've excelled in their particular field. Some people are better communicators than others. Some people have superior interpersonal skills. I thought Charlie George was terrific. He made me and my son feel very welcome, and I think everybody else on the tour felt the same.
Yeah, absolute pure class. And you know, the last question before we really go into Southampton is that it seems that there's probably a lot of football rivalry in Parliament, on and off the floor, and you're very clearly very open about your Arsenal supportership, and there are other high-profile Arsenal supporters. We don't need to call them out by name. We know who they are. But how often in the day-to-day dynamic of the house does football talk or rivalry really come into the picture, or is it pretty much just outside the walls?
No, it quite frequently arises, because it's quite a regular experience, I must say to both of you, for the speaker sitting in the chair to be approached by colleagues wanting to raise issues. Now, for the most part, I want to reassure your listeners, people do come to the chair to ask procedural questions. That is to say, you know, when is X debate coming on? Is it legitimate if I ask why? You know, what might be the deadline for Z? And so on and so forth. Of course, people ask questions that relate to the running of the business of the house. But, you know, there is quite a lot of friendly chat, and people do come to the chair knowing that I have an interest in football, and on the basis that they do too, and they make comments. And so the answer is that several times over the years, an Arsenal fan amongst the members of the house has come up to me and made a comment about a match, either in advance of the match, saying, you know, let's hope we win tomorrow or Saturday or Sunday or whatever it may be, or ruining an unfortunate performance or a disappointing defeat. And similarly, you won't be entirely surprised, Mike, Andy, to know that supporters of other teams do not feel that they need to hold back in sharing with me when I am, in a sense, a captive market. I'm sitting there and can't escape their delight that their team has got the better of mine. So it is not altogether unknown for a Tottenham supporter on the unfortunate,
You remembered their name.
fortunately not too frequent occasions, to come up to the chair and say, well, we got the better of you. And, oh, do I remember the name? Oh, they're all written down in a little book. That was a joke. That was a joke. Before it goes round that I'm bearing some personal grudge against a Tottenham supporting colleague, I'm not. But I do now and again tease Tottenham supporters in the house. Ian Duncan Smith, former leader of the British Conservative Party, is a very well-known and loyal supporter of Tottenham. And there's a Conservative MP in Harrow, which is North London, who's a very strong Tottenham fan, Bob Blackman, and I couldn't resist teasing him recently after Arsenal's 4-2 defeat of his team.
Oh,
and he said that he would not be provoked. He would not be provoked by what I had said, and he immediately switched attention to the question that he wanted to ask. So there is a little bit of banter, and I think most people, I mean, you can't please everybody, and some people might disapprove, think, well, it's no bad thing. We don't have to lose our sense of humour or abandon all sense of perspective. Yes, we've got important issues to debate, but there's no harm in having a little bit of lightness of touch, and you know, the exchanges that refer to football teams are usually very good-natured. There's a wonderful member of the House of Commons called Jim Shannon, wonderful because he's very popular and he's a very kind and decent man, and he's a strong Leicester City fan, and I think I teased him on one occasion about Arsenal getting the better of Leicester, and he took it in very good part.
Well, I'm sure he had his say a few years ago as well.
Yeah, precisely, as you rightly say, Mike.
So before we ask and I'm not going to ask who the member of parliament from the Southampton area is, let's get to that game. We have to get to it. So, you know, did anyone really think we were going to go undefeated for the rest of the season? I think not. No. But Southampton, near the bottom of the table, everyone's licking their lips. We really should have seen this coming, though, because you know, we've got a defense that's absolutely ravaged by injuries, suspensions, to the point where we put out a starting back three of Lichtsteiner, Koscielny, and Granit Xhaka. And we may need to discuss the Koscielny thing in a little bit. But, John, at some point, the magic act of the last 4 months of getting results when we may not have quite deserved it was going to run out eventually, was it not?
I think that was bound to happen. Did I feel miserable on Sunday afternoon, and did I continue to feel down about it for many, many hours and into yesterday? The honest answer is I did. I was disappointed, but I did think that there was an inevitability about it, not because I am instinctively a glass half empty or a pessimistic or a negative soul, and I'm not. I'm generally quite upbeat. But I think there were two reasons why it was always going to be difficult. First of all, a winning streak doesn't go on forever. And when I saw the defensive formation, I did have some concerns. I'm a big admirer of Laurent Koscielny. I think he's a fantastic servant of the club. And, you know, he's a great centre-back. But he's been personally ravaged by injury and out for a long time. And I think it was quite a tough call. I'm not criticising, but I think it was quite a tough call for us to expect, put it that way, one might hope, for us to expect that he would necessarily be able to withstand the rigours of the whole game and not
after playing 70 minutes on
experience
Wednesday.
Any sort of difficulty or tension.
Yeah, I mean, and he played 70 minutes on Thursday actually against Carabao as well. I don't know that anyone would have said going in that his return to the first team would be playing all but 20 minutes of two games in 4 days.
Well, that's a very good point. You know, and although we beat Carabao, you know, it was a relatively pedestrian victory, but it was still quite physical. There was quite a lot involved, and indeed most matches are at the highest level. And okay, we didn't look under threat against Carabao, but you know, wherever you're playing and whoever you're playing against, it's going to be quite physical. And particularly, I think you could argue if you're a defender, you are going to be having to do a lot of work, and I think that was always inevitable. And relying on the wing backs, you know, was always a bit of a gamble. The other thing I would say, secondly, is that, you know, it's not always just a question of where somebody is in the league. And you're quite right, of course, that Southampton were relatively low down. But, you know, if we worked purely on the basis of where people are at a table, there would never be surprises in sport. Do you know what I mean? Everything would be done on a sort of computer-generated basis. And the truth of the matter is, of course, that over a period of years, we've had a pretty indifferent record at Southampton. We got a 1-1 draw last season with a late equaliser by Olivier Giroud, if I remember correctly. But, you know, we have suffered substantial defeats at the St Mary's Stadium on various occasions. So, you know, it was never by any means a given.
No, it shouldn't.
I must admit that at 2-2, I thought, if anything, the flow of the game, the run of the game was going our way, and it looked more likely that we would get the third goal than that they would. But, you know, such is sport. So, you know, we felt wretched about it. My son and I were pretty hacked off because we care about our team. It's not just a light or minor thing from our point of view any more than it is from yours. So we were disappointed, but I think if you'll forgive me saying so, I always apply the Churchill motto, KBO, keep buggering on at all times. You've just got to keep going, and you've just got to have a brief conversation about what went wrong, with your friend or in this case my son, and within one's family, and today with you. And then you've got to look forward and think about the next game. So, is it a disappointment? Of course it's a disappointment. We sacrificed 3 points and we're now 5 points behind Tottenham. Is it a disaster? No, it's not a disaster. We've got to keep it in perspective, but think carefully about the use of our resources in the next match. And you're only as good as your next match, just as in politics, you're only as good as your last speech. We've got to think of our next match and, the Carabao Cup tomorrow, and what sort of formation we're going to put together to try to repeat the victory that we scored over Tottenham, 2.5 weeks ago.
Yeah, I mean, it is kind of, the way you snap back is more important than the way you concede, assuming you do snap back. Speaking of snapping, unfortunately, Koscielny, Andy, you remember in the last 2 years when we knew Koscielny was struggling with a tender Achilles before it finally gave in, we would always talk about how, when he would be asked to play 2 games in a week, a midweek game and a weekend game, that he played, reasonably well in the midweek game, and then the second game was always a real struggle for him, always. And this was before the injury. Now he's making his way back. I'm a little skeptical of his ability to handle the stress of too many regular minutes. I'm sure it wasn't in the plans, like we said, but whether it's a physical limitation, a cohesive back line, rust, or I should say lack of a cohesive back line. I mean, should we really be surprised to leak 3 goals at St. Mary's? I'm not.
No, and as John said, it was a pretty pedestrian match for him on Thursday, but there's still a quick turnaround. And when you have an injury of that magnitude, the back of your mind is, should I go into a challenge? You double guess yourself in the first couple matches, and Southampton had a tactic. We're gonna play them in the air. They knew we had a faulty back line, and the circumstances surrounding Southampton, new manager, the supporters had free beer. I know we have a user question a little later of does the manager's enthusiasm on the touchline help the team? Well, it not only helps the team, it gets the crowd involved. They're excited with this new manager. I think it's a great snag for them, and so just the whole dynamic. But they came in with a let's pick apart Arsenal in the air and let's high press on their back line. And he's just not at 100% right now, Mike, physically and probably not mentally either.
I mean, I really don't want everybody to start getting down on him, because he has, as John, you mentioned, he's been a wonderful servant to the club, but there's a point at which sentiment overtakes strategy and reality, and this was just an unfortunate situation to have to rely on him so much so quickly.
Mike, I have no doubt that if he was fully fit in the summer, he would have been in that French squad, and he would have played the majority of minutes in that World Cup, because he brings that to the team when he's fully fit and fully healthy. But I think, as John mentioned before, we didn't have a choice. We didn't have someone healthier than him to step in. And
that's going to be a question I'm going to ask in a few minutes, because we might have, but it would have been a risk. So let's table that for just a second.
Who were we missing? We were missing Rob Holding. We were missing
Mustafi.
Socrates. We were missing Mustafi. So there was a limited range of options, very limited range of options. So I certainly wouldn't want to criticise either Koscielny or indeed Unai Emery for that matter. I think that he was wrestling with a very difficult dilemma, so to speak. And I'm not saying that anybody else could have tackled it more successfully. It's just it could have worked, but the odds were probably slightly against us, and in the end, it just didn't quite work out.
Yeah, hindsight is 20/20 in this situation as well. John, I would be remiss. Now we have about a 20 or 30 minute debate on Mesut Ozil that needs to happen fairly soon. It's not going to happen today because of our limited time, but I do want to make sure we get your opinion, because it's not Arsenal if there's not a lightning rod and an individual who, who everybody that cares about Arsenal falls on one side or the other about. And if it's not Arsene Wenger, now it's Mesut Ozil. So after playing on Thursday most of the game, clearly fit enough to play on Sunday, he isn't picked to start. And whether it's tactical, whether it's, I can't imagine if back spasms is truly the issue that he's dealing with. And I've gone on record as saying I think it's something else, specifically one of two things. But you wouldn't be on the bench if you had back spasms. Back spasms don't allow you to play 20 minutes as opposed to 90. So this was clearly tactical. What are your thoughts on kind of the, how do you solve a problem like Maria situation going on with Mesut right now?
Well, I think he's a formidable talent, a prodigious talent, in some respects perhaps even an exceptional talent. If you look at his assist record, it is a very good record. And, I've got a very high regard for him. Now, I think you're probably sensing that there's a but. And there is a but. Like and I'm afraid the but is that I do think this season he absolutely has to put in regular outstanding performances rather than periodic outstanding performances. It's very easy to be critical, and I don't want to knock him. I love watching Mesut Ozil play at his best. I think he adds value on a huge scale, and he's already provided for Arsenal fans some unforgettable moments that a lot of us will treasure. A quite extraordinary skill with the ball, a tremendous vision, and an ability to pick out the opportunity of a long pass. And sometimes, his performance in those one-touch situations close to or within the penalty area, his performances in those instances are almost magical. But he does also tend to go missing for quite long periods in games. And, I do think that that's a challenge. And I think it's not unreasonable. I don't think it's unfair. I don't think it's objectionable to say that a player who is very well paid and is one of our stars should be looked to with confidence to perform at or close to his best 70% of the time, and maybe slightly more. And I'm not sure yet that that's the case. I also feel that although you probably won't change somebody's fundamental style or attributes, I would like to see, on top of the wonderful creative talent, sometimes a slightly greater physicality on the part of Ozil. I think that, in the tackle, he's often a bit vulnerable. I sometimes feel as though he doesn't fully commit to a tackle. And, he's wonderful when he's got the ball, but when he's challenged, when he's got the ball, in a rather physical way, he sometimes looks a little bit vulnerable. I'm very reluctant to be overcritical, but, if you're asking me what my overall assessment is, I think he's an asset to the team, but nothing is forever. And I think this season, when we're looking to get back into the top four and he's looking to impress a new manager, I think it's a fair point to say, yeah, he's a humongous talent, but he's got to prove it on a very regular basis rather than on a periodic basis.
Fair play. I think that's what a lot of us are thinking about Ozil. And
is that Andy, reasonably explicit? I'm
absolutely.
not trying to sit on the fence, but I've got a slightly nuanced view. If you're saying to me, if you're asking me, would I be inclined to sell him tomorrow? The answer is no, I wouldn't. I think that he should be given a chance under the new management. And, I would hope that this year he can do great work. He has done great work in previous seasons. All I'm saying is, what I think is obvious to a lot of people, that it's been intermittent. Yeah. And, for a long period when Alexis Sanchez was with us, Sanchez towards the end tailed off somewhat and his performances were less impressive. But in the period that he was with us, I felt that he was more often consistently outstanding. And Ozil, though at his best equally brilliant, was less frequently outstanding. Yeah. And so I think that the challenge is simply for him to perform at his best more often and see it as his role and responsibility to be a change maker and potentially a game winner, not once in a while, but very often. And just to ask himself, with all that wonderful talent that he's got, how can I just inject a slightly greater physicality into my play so that alongside all the other weapons I've got the the weapon of greater physical endurance and rigor.
Yeah, I mean, and for
And now,
reasons
can I provide any of those qualities,
right.
Mike or Andy? And the answer is no. But then I'm not paid £350,000 a week.
No, that's true. And for reasons we'll talk
So
about.
I'm a fan, not a player. I don't claim to play football. I wouldn't have a clue. But I obviously want my heroes to perform well all the time. And if they can't perform well all of the time, I want them to perform well most of the time.
Do you think
at the
there's
moment, I would say Ozil performs well some of the time.
Well, he performs, period, some of the time. I think that's another one of the issues, and that's what I want to talk with you about, Andy, on another show. And is there a happier player right now in the Premier League than Alexis Sanchez? And we'll talk about why in just a minute. But the goals we conceded, first goal, Southampton plays the ball out wide. Target has all kinds of time. Just puts in a magnificent cross that finds Danny Ings' head like a magnet. I mean, that shouldn't be happening. But at that point in the game, I'm thinking, fair play. That was a great cross, great header. I wasn't really starting to cry about our defense quite yet. But, Andy, it kind of didn't get any better from there, did it?
No, it didn't. I mean, I hate to say it, but Koscielny's shown us in the past his inability to attack balls in the air, and how he's trying to win a ball at head height with his foot. I mean, I just don't know why he's doing that at this level. Neil Warnock recently said the biggest adjustment for Cardiff coming into the Premier League was the ability of teams in this league to drop the ball on set pieces and crosses on a platter to their attacking players. And you saw that with this first cross. I mean, it was beautiful, and had Koscielny done something to try and win it with his head, maybe we would have seen a different outcome. You'd expect it of an international player of his caliber and quality, but it's just one of those faults that we've seen in the past with him, and it was just a terrible goal to concede because
he was a step behind him, which is why he didn't have it.
But just try and get up with your head. I mean, it's a bad one to concede.
John, the bright side of this game, probably, if anybody could find one, would be the performance from Henrik Mkhitaryan that showed he isn't exactly ready to give up his spot and roll over quite yet. So, his first goal. Welcome back, Ballon de Nacho, with the sharp angled cutback cross, and where in the world did that header from Mickey come from? I mean, John, we try not to get too excited too quickly about things, but after that goal, I mean, we basically have our co-Ballon d'Or winners for next year, do we not?
Well, I thought it was a great move, and I was very impressed by Mkhitaryan. He didn't try to overdo it. He didn't he didn't power it with excessive force. So the main thing was to get a good firm header and in the right direction, and he did it, and it was absolutely spot on. And the cross that led to it was superb. By the way, I have rather missed Nacho Monreal in the team. I know that the question was about Henri Mkhitaryan, and he did a terrific job in scoring the second goal as well. He put in, I would go so far as to say, almost a stellar performance. But, I do think that Monreal is a highly competent defender. And he does have that ability also to break and to put balls in, from our opponent's point of view, ominous positions. And, the combination of his energy and foresight, if you will, on the one hand, and Mkhitaryan's anticipation of the opportunity and ability to get into the right place at the right time, made a key difference. And, of course, at that point, as you can imagine, there were noisy celebrations in the Bercow living room, and Oliver and I thought, great, we're back on track. Unfortunately, as you know, we went behind 3 times, and the third time it was too late. But that was, a key moment in the game, and Mkhitaryan, as you say, made it very clear that he's not resting on his laurels, and he's most certainly not giving up his fight for a regular place. I thought that he did enough to suggest that he's got a lot still to contribute.
And it just kind of bolsters that whole move from Nacho Monreal. Just bolsters Andy and my contention that Nacho Monreal makes Ashley Cole look like a Sunday League footballer. I mean, it's just Ashley Cole in his prime. He's just the best player of all time. So we love him. We find him more than highly competent. But anyway.
Yes, it's quite funny. When Monreal first joined us, if you remember, he tended to lose out to Kieran Gibbs more often than not. And, he worked and worked and worked. And I guess he thought, I'm not prepared to accept the role of understudy. I'm going to take that place from Kieran. And, Gibbs contributed much to Arsenal over the years. But, eventually, Nacho wrested control of that spot. And once he'd wrested control of it, he didn't let go. And, I think there's a lot to him. Dare I say it, I think he's perhaps sometimes slightly underrated. And, I regard him as a big deal as far as Arsenal are concerned.
Not underrated by us, but he's underrated by most. No. I think we might overrate him just a bit, but no, I agree. He's a consummate professional, and I love that he's back. He also seems to bounce back from injury with strong performances right away, whereas a lot of players, you don't see that, and I'm not sure what that comes down to. But, Andy, the second goal, you're a keeper. John, Andy fancies himself a keeper. And I don't mean in the sense that I want to keep you around. I just mean, you're a goalkeeper.
Oh, come on. Both instances.
Clearly, Leno was just flat-footed to the point where I didn't even think the ball was headed towards the goal. I just assumed he was standing there waiting for the goal kick until the net moves. So, I mean, that's a lame goal to concede. What happened? Talk us through it.
Yeah, I watched it back a few times, and Leno on the ball being floated to him looks as though he's going to come off his line. Decides at the last minute he's going to stay, and hence the flat feet. There's a moment in a goalkeeper's 2-second world where you just go, oh shit, because there's nothing you can do. I mean, the ball's floated perfectly to that upper 90. It's a beautifully scored goal. When you're a defender, 101 is you need to get between the goal and the player. Lich was behind him. Koscielny's in front of him. He split the defenders beautifully. I mean, there's sometimes you can't do anything about it, Mike. And it's a well-taken goal. And again, it's a cross in the air that we can't deal with. I'll tell you what, Unai was probably pissed after that game. I don't want to take anything away from Arsene, but last season, you would probably, if we had conceded and we lose that game 3-2, he goes into the locker room after and tells the guys, hey, it's okay, we'll bounce back. I'm thinking Unai was throwing stuff, kicking over tables. That's how I assume he is as a manager. But it's a poor goal to concede, Mike, but it's a beautifully taken goal. Yeah. What can you do? Yeah.
So halftime comes and goes. Lacazette comes in for an injured Bellerin, just as we were getting to know him again. And inside 10 minutes, Lacazette plays a big part in our second goal. I mean, he kind of teams up and helps to create a turnover deep in their end, feeds the ball to Mkhitaryan, who at that point is just bursting with confidence, takes a crack at goal, and I don't care one bit. I'm sorry, though. That's an own goal in my eyes. I don't know how he's still been credited with it. Maybe I don't understand the rules. But, John, is that one going to the dubious goals panel? And if so, do you have a seat on that panel?
I have no seat on any such panel, but on this occasion I beg to differ. It seems to me that the criterion, and maybe I'm wrong, you guys are very much more knowledgeable than I, is whether the ball was on target. And the ball was otherwise going to be on target. Now, whether in fact it would have crossed the line or whether it would have been saved, is debatable and forever uncertain. But certainly it was going to be on target. And so it seems to me that yes, the deflection was helpful, but the ball was on target anyway. It wasn't as though the ball was off target and the deflection caused it to go in. The ball was on target and the deflection then caused it to go probably a little further away from the keeper than it otherwise would have done. But I think it would have been rough justice if it had not been credited to Mkhitaryan as a goal. In fact, my son and I discussed it at the time. My son is a qualified football referee. He's only just turned 15, but he qualified as a referee 12 months ago, and so, he's having to make some of these judgments himself. And I said to him, Oliver, I would have thought that is Mkhitaryan's goal, isn't it? And he said, oh, yes, Dad, it was on target. He said the deflection may or may not have been helpful. In fact, it was helpful, but it was on target anyway. So I think you're being, if you'll forgive me saying so, Mike, I think you're being slightly unfair to Mkhitaryan there.
Well, but, maybe so. It's just really my lack of understanding of I know that whether it's on target or not has a lot to do with it, but I guess I was adding the additional, perhaps unfair guideline that it has to. I mean, when you look at the view from behind the goal, where Mkhitaryan was placing the shot was exactly where the goalkeeper was. However, I guess what we won't know is whether the goalkeeper diving low and whether the shot would have lifted and gone over him. If I don't question it was on target, and so if that's the guideline, that it just has to be on target regardless.
I mean, let me meet you halfway by saying I think the deflection was helpful.
It was.
I accept the deflection was helpful.
Goal.
That I think is a statement of the blindingly obvious, and we can all agree about that. But and it's not a major point of dispute at all. But I think that if it had been left to me, I would have credited it to him, and by a narrow head, for the reasons you've explained, you wouldn't have done.
I'd always prefer we get credit that our player gets credited for it. I just try to remove my head from the. Yeah, I try to
you're a bit doubtful about it.
Yeah, well, it's a goal. That's what it was. It was a goal.
Yeah.
Sure. So now, like you said before, John, now the game is ours. I mean, it's 2-2. It's definitely, we've gone level. We're in the ascendancy. We got a 23-game winning streak or undefeated streak in the bag. It's guaranteed money, and not so fast. Not when Shane Drugba Long and Charlie Rooney Austin are sitting there on the bench. Those two. And, of course, they end up hooking up for an 86-minute winner. And, Andy, when we started doing the podcast, you used to always tell me, if for some reason you didn't watch all 90 minutes, just don't admit to it on the air, because you don't want people, And I admit, I had to go to a family gathering. I had to leave at the 60th minute. And, I was, of course, keeping up with the score and saw when we went behind 3-2. And it took me about 36 hours and 48 minutes to finally bring myself to where I could watch it.
Was it really that bad? You were in mourning. You were in mourning.
It was bad. I got over my warning.
Mike, I empathize with you.
Do I really want to have to watch it, though? I mean, I don't think I ever would have gone back and watched it if it wasn't for what you and I and Andy are doing at this moment. So I finally went back and watched it, and I've been vomiting ever since.
How do you think I feel, Mike? I spent the entire
There is one way you can avoid the vomiting.
There's a lot of vomiting going on over here. I don't know why.
There is one way you can avoid the vomiting, if you'll forgive me being rather flippant, and you may say that on your podcast there is no room for levity, in which case I stand suitably chastised. But one way in which you could avoid the vomiting, although you would be a less distinguished student of the game than you are if you did so, would be not to watch it.
Yeah.
And there is obviously a difference between us, and I suppose it at least in part explains why A, you're more knowledgeable, much more knowledgeable than I, and B, why you run this podcast, because there is perhaps a difference between us, if I may say so to both of you guys, Mike and Andy. My approach with matches is quite simple. I usually record matches, even when I go to them. Even when Oliver and I go, we usually record if the match is on Sky or BT Sport. And our approach is very straightforward. If we win the match, then when we get home, either straight away or the following day, we look at the highlights so that we see the goals for a second time. And if we've lost the match, we scrub the thing from Planner.
It didn't exist.
It didn't exist. And I'm the same with tennis. I'm a tennis fan, and when my hero Roger Federer wins, then I will watch again. I'll usually watch the whole thing through, or I'll watch the key moments. But if he's lost the match, I think, this is 2 hours of my life I don't need to spend seeing how my hero lost, and therefore I don't bother. But you guys are really conscientious students, so you watch again not only when Arsenal have won, but when Arsenal have lost. And that no doubt explains the extent of your knowledge and the skill with which you run this podcast.
Well, we certainly appreciate those comments, and I think we now have a name for this podcast, which is Speaker Bercow helps Mike and Andy reduce the vomiting. I mean, that's as catchy as it gets. So tell us, Andy, what I mean, as a keeper, where do you fall on this one? And it isn't just a need for us to find blame anywhere. That's not the point of it. I just want to see. To me, I'm interested in your view of kind of what could or couldn't have done that.
Well, we're Arsenal supporters, and if you look at social media, we have to blame someone. It's just the way the world works now. But Mike, I'll always defend the goalie, and this was a mistake. To be fair, if I'm playing in goal and that ball is crossed in, based off of how my defenders have been playing all day, I'm coming off the line to try and collect it. That being said, you're told from the earliest age you do not leave your 6-yard box if you cannot get that ball. And for him to go up and try and tip that over is just absurd. And, got very close to it. But I just think the way that the match was going, he wanted to prove a point. He does well often coming off of his line and punching balls away. But, he wasn't Superman on Sunday. It's unfortunate because I feel like, and again, I watched it over and over again. And if Koscielny had played a little bit closer, and I'm not picking on him, but if he played a little bit closer to the player on that, Leno's likely staying on his line. And who knows if he saves it if he does that anyway. It's just a poor decision. And it sucks it comes so close to what happened at Man United because people are still blaming him for that second goal with the pass back, which, again, I don't feel like that's on him. You should never play a ball back to your keeper unless he asks for it, especially in rain with a player running onto it as well. So, Leno's young, and we saw a lot of keeper errors this weekend. We saw it at Liverpool. They obviously got the win, but he's young, Mike, and he's going to learn. And those are moments where I'm sure he got a lot of phone calls from. I bet, I'm guaranteeing it. Layman, Seaman, ex-Arsenal keepers reaching out saying, "Pick your head up." And I'm sure. And I'm sure Czech was the same way. They've all made those mistakes in their career. They all have. And it just unfortunately comes in a match where we were destined to lose. And let's not code it, Mike. I mean, we've gotten through a lot of these matches on luck, and we just didn't have it. And if you're going to write a script and you're going to say you're going to win 22 matches and then you're going to come up against Shane Long in Southampton, the script is written for you to lose that next match. I mean, it's just how it is. And
I'm embarrassed I didn't see this coming, and like to the point where I put my entire mortgage on.
Oh, I did. I told my dad when he. He's like, "How are you feeling about today?" And I said, "This is the one we lose." So it's what
really?
Happens.
You said that in advance of the match, did you?
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
We'll be waiting to see the bet ticket though. That's how we know.
Yeah, but no, I mean, at the end of the day, Leno had a poor match, but I don't think you can blame just him. There's 10 players in front of him. Ozil on that, in midfield gave up. I mean, there was just a lot of errors, Mike, and unfortunately, the last player to defend the ball is the keeper, and all fault goes on him. But he should never have left his line unless he was 100% sure he could get to that ball, and he wasn't.
Sure.
He wasn't. And credit to Leno after the match. He is young and a little naive, and he was getting a lot of shit. Excuse me for my French, but. From supporters that he was kind of joking with Shane Long after the match that he was an inch away from getting it. And it's like, well, what else can you do? He's going to be down. He's going to drop his head. He's going to need lifting up. But at least he had a sense of humor about it because, again, this is just a game, right? And he needs to learn. And so, unfortunately, we lose. But it's a wake-up call going into tomorrow because
that's interesting. I didn't see that.
It was when the camera kind of spins around the field and they show the players kind of being.
Think about how much people gave it to Alexis when he was laughing on the sideline after being.
He wasn't necessarily laughing. It was just kind of like he did the whole when Socrates.
I was this close.
Like, hey, you dove. Yeah, it was like, hey, I got really close to that and. No one doubts that he made mistakes in Bundesliga, but I don't put this match on Leno losing it for us. I put it on just, who knows where the ball would have gone, know. And at the end of the day, it was just a poor decision by a young keeper, and maybe he, the question is does Emery now give him some opportunity to sit and let Czech kind of step in? Who knows?
I don't know that's the right move at this point.
No, I'm not sure either.
But we'll see. I mean,
we have
tomorrow
a big match tomorrow,
and
we rested a lot of people, I think, to prepare for that because, like you said, Mike, on paper, Southampton were there for the killing, but you always have to play that next match against Tottenham. It's such a big fixture. If we were playing, Watford in the Carabao Cup, I think he would have went with a full squad on Sunday. But when it's Spurs, you need to give people the rest.
And let's talk about that. I mean, tomorrow's the second North London derby in a span of 17 days. Chance at making run for silver is at stake this time. Silverware that like Pochettino and Kane and Dele and that lot is yet to win any of that kind of silverware.
They're about to lose their manager too, which is brilliant.
Yeah, that's true. They're about to lose their manager in May. So this is very different than last week's midweek game against Carabao, where we saw a lot of the academy squad playing. But not only is it the chance at silverware and a home match against our biggest hated rivals, but it's also the first chance to see how the team responds to a loss since the West Ham game in August. So, John, I mean, if you're Unai Emery, and we're doing an audio podcast here, so I don't really have any proof whether you are or aren't Unai Emery, but if you are, how do you approach this game with a home game with Burnley waiting at lunchtime on Saturday? Do you go strong, you go all out, or do you try to kind of be more careful about it?
Personally, because it's against Tottenham and because there's the sniff of silverware, I would go all out. After a couple of years in which we've had a relatively blemished record against Tottenham in the head-to-head and suffered the detriment of falling behind them for each of the last 2 years in the Premier League, I would say that really any opportunity to prove our superiority over Tottenham, our capacity still to beat Tottenham, is an opportunity to be taken. So, sure, the match against Burnley, Premier League, points at stake, is very important at the weekend. But if you're asking me, would I be inclined to experiment with new and younger players tomorrow, or would I tend to look to the tried and tested pros and some of the winning formations? The answer is I'd go with the latter. And as far as the keeper is concerned, we talked about the importance of bouncing back from a disappointing result or a relatively poor performance, and I certainly wouldn't ditch Leno tomorrow. I would take the view that if he was otherwise intended to play, I can't remember now off the top of my head whether he has played the Carabao Cup matches. If that's not been the normal course of events, well, so be it. But if he would otherwise play tomorrow, my instinct would still be to play Leno. Yeah, he had a tough game at the weekend, but you've got to bounce back, and he's also put in some very good performances. And more generally, as far as tomorrow is concerned, I think that we've got to field a really top-flight team. You posed the question at some point about Koscielny and the challenges he's had. Well, it may well be that after the sheer physical experience of the last couple of matches, the grueling undertaking that he's had, he's not ready. I don't know, but it seems to me we've got to put in a very strong defensive back four, and I can't be certain who that will be given the injuries, but I think if we can play Monreal, we most certainly should. It looks as though Bellerin will not be available, but I think you also need quite a physical back four, and I think Kolasinac has had good games and less good games, but Kolasinac is physically a strong player, and I tend to think in terms of physicality, Granit Xhaka's got a lot to be said for him. So, I think that we've got to be prepared to gamble a bit by not gamble in the sense of putting forward a second-tier team and hoping that Tottenham do the same, but putting forward a top-notch team and being prepared to press our case. So I think there was a compelling argument for using Lacazette and Aubameyang as well. And, just off the top of my head, I haven't got the complete 11 in my head as to exactly how they should all be positioned on the pitch, but I think that we should go for a really strong team tomorrow. Beating Tottenham is more important than beating any other single team, and it does a huge amount for our morale and our self-esteem and our sense of place and where we belong and what our club ought to do. And one victory against Tottenham, 4-2 from 2-1 down at the beginning of the month, was great, but if we could get a second victory fewer than 3 weeks later,
and pull the silverware away from them yet again.
Yeah, I mean, I just think I think it's a big game. Of course, the Carabao Cup is generally regarded as, most of your listeners will know, as the least important of the competitions. Traditionally, Arsene Wenger didn't take it anything like as seriously as other competitions and did regard it as an opportunity to experiment and bring in new young players who were pitching to get into the first team but weren't ordinarily in the first team, and I don't knock or cavil at that, but it doesn't seem to me that tomorrow, quarter-final against Tottenham, is an occasion to do that. I think tomorrow is an occasion to put our best foot forward, and that means using players who are used to playing with each other, who are mentally robust and whose physicality, as well as his creativity, is up to the task of taking on Tottenham.
Would you say that it would provide you more joy to prevent Tottenham from winning silverware to break their streak than it would to ourselves win the League Cup? I mean, it's almost tomorrow's game is more not necessarily as much to me about, oh, we got a chance to really, to make a deep run in this League Cup and that would be a great result, as it is to just make sure, because this is the last chance to control this fate, that they don't win it.
Yes.
I mean, if this were
the
FA Cup,
the honest answer is, absolutely, Mike. The honest answer is I am very tribal about the Arsenal-Tottenham rivalry, and I would actually like us to win the Cup, to win the Carabao Cup. I don't think it's insignificant. I basically take the attitude that if you're in a competition, you should be in it to win it. And, you shouldn't just treat it with a sort of cavalier indifference, and I don't think any of us would do that. But at least as important as us winning it is trying to ensure that Tottenham don't. And if we're to ensure that Tottenham don't, when we're in a head-to-head, we've got a heaven-sent opportunity to see them off. In those circumstances, to put forward a second-tier team and hope for the best would seem to me to be risky to the point of being reckless. And, we've got to acknowledge the strength of our opponents. We may not like them, we've got a bit of rivalry with them, but we've got to recognise their strengths. And, they have got some formidable strengths. And so, we've got to defend well. I don't think we can neglect the importance of a solid defence, and there may be a bit of feeling our way in the match. And a straightforward all-out attack is probably not realistic. We've got to be ready and prepared to dig in and defend doggedly. But we've also got to be prepared to use our best strikers. There's no point in having great strikers, and we do have great strikers in Alexander Lacazette and Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang, and we've got to use them.
Absolutely. And now I want to ask you a quick question. We did a poll online and just a kind of a yes or no as to what you think, to see if it matches our users. Speaking of our depth at the back four and kind of the options that we have, there's an interesting name that became a free agent yesterday, released from his contract at Besiktas. Please pardon my language. A certain former Real Madrid defender named Pepe. Literally my most hated player that has nothing to do with having done things against Arsenal, just in general, of all time. But we did a poll to see whether people would want to dance with the devil there on a free agent contract. And about 2/3 of voters said they would not want him here. John, do you have an opinion on the player, and would you sign him for 6 to 18 months?
No, I don't. The truth of the matter is that I just haven't watched enough of his performances to have a very strong view. And so I'm sorry to give you a really disappointing answer, but I certainly think we need to buttress our defence. It's still not there. It's not quite right.
Uh-oh.
What's your clinching observation in your mind that you wouldn't take him?
Yeah, we lost you for about 10 seconds of audio there, but
I'm sorry.
If you've just asked me why I wouldn't take him, he is. I don't even know how to say this in a way that won't offend multiple countries, and he is not a nice guy. And not only is he not a nice guy, he's a cheat. It's not that he's not a Lichtsteiner type. I talk about wanting players who, for lack of a better word, are dicks, as they call them here. I mean, people with an attitude, people who don't just roll over. You got enough nice guys in the team. You need some guys with some attitude. And I love the signing of Lichtsteiner. I love how we're starting to see some of our players like Kolasinac and even Bellerin have a bit of an edge to them. But Pepe is not just one of those guys. He's also a cheat, and a red card every 5 games. And it's just as good of a defender as he is, and as much as he could change games, that's his MO. And I wouldn't want him in an Arsenal shirt, but it is kind of hard to turn your attention away from somebody who wasn't released because he wasn't good enough. He was released because of financial troubles at Besiktas, but could potentially make a difference. But just interesting. And lastly, before we go to user questions, we want to make sure that our users' questions that We had a lot of really good questions of you that we want to get to, but they've just announced, well, they haven't announced it yet, but it's become pretty much obvious that Arsenal is going to spend at least a couple of weeks in the summertime touring the good old US of A again. Last time they came here, a wonderful partnership was formed, and you're talking to them now, John, but that was the genesis of this podcast. But maybe as many as 5 games spanning the entire country. I'm buying my wife flowers every day because I'm basically going to just be I'm an absentee husband and father this summer. But Mr. Speaker, are you usually busy in late July, and would you ever consider coming to a summer tour to follow the team? Because we got a really nice guest room that you can stay in. It's nicer than Andy's.
Well, it's not impossible, but I have no immediate plans on that front. I've no current intention to go to the US in July. It has to be said that late July is not impossible from my point of view, because Parliament has usually risen for the summer recess by then. So it's not impossible, but it slightly depends on family commitments, and it depends on what sort of allocation of time would be needed. But have I ever done such a visit on a foreign tour? I haven't, but might I one day want to do so? I might well one day want to do so. I much enjoy my job as speaker, but obviously, you do think from time to time, well, what will I do in the future? And I would just drop you this hint, that when I'm no longer discharging my responsibilities as speaker, I would like to spend more time watching football and more time watching tennis. And I spend quite a lot of time watching both, but the idea of being able to say, right, well, I'm going to go and spend a period of days watching that tournament abroad, be it a football tournament or a tennis tournament, is very appealing to me, because I love those sports, and they're utterly absorbing, compelling, and a source of terrific relief and release. So, if you were to say to me, do I make a point of watching Arsenal abroad? I don't. I haven't done. But could I imagine doing so? I could.
Well, if you need a place to stay, our guest room does not share a bathroom with our 1-year-old son, because A, it doesn't, and B, we don't have a 1-year-old son. Andy's does. So
that is very reassuring.
Just pointing that out.
Thank you for your generosity of spirit.
I had a nice visit having to remove.
Mike,
I so removed the little
he could
toilet
expense
cup.
the flights.
What'd you say?
I said you live in Washington, so he could expense the flights.
That's true. I do live just outside our nation's capital. But anyway, enough of that. Let's get to our user questions. I want to thank. These are all from when we originally had hoped to have you on a few weeks ago.
Okay.
We've updated a couple that were kind of timing specific, but want to thank our users for sending these in. From Lewis White, our buddy Lewis, regarding our defensive situation with some of our defenders, Nacho, Koscielny, Kolasinac, Maitland-Niles, now back from injury, and others, Holding and Bellerin, that are recently injured. If everyone were to be available, who do you start in a back 4 and a back 3? I mean, who gets dropped and who comes in?
I would certainly want Nacho. Sorry.
No, John, go ahead.
Well, I think I would almost invariably want Nacho Monreal to be right up there in the reckoning. And so, he would be there for sure. If Laurent Koscielny is fit, and as you say, that's the premise on which your question is based, I would want him there. And I think otherwise I would say Hector Bellerin is the most distinctive of defenders, and at his best has got the capacity to run extremely fast, and so I rate him very highly. And I've got 3 there, and if I had to pick a 4th, I guess I would say either Kolasinac or Socrates.
Okay.
And, there are some gaps there. There are some people I haven't mentioned. It doesn't mean that I want to rubbish them. It doesn't mean I don't think they're good players that the club can use. But, if you're asking me to say, which defenders do I particularly rate, then I particularly rate Monreal, Koscielny, Bellerin, and Kolasinac. I think Holding has put in some good performances, but, he's still got quite a long way to go, and He's a young player. He's still got a lot that he can learn and improve. And I think Mustafi, is a dedicated servant of the club, but his performances have been quite mixed. And, I respect his loyalty, but, I wouldn't put him as high up as some of the others. Lichtsteiner, of course, has got vast experience. We know that. It's quite early days, really, to make a judgment about the frequency with which one would expect him to appear. But as I say, for me, Monreal, Koscielny, Bellerin, and Kolasinac.
Would you play them as a back four with those four players, given the kind of the left-sided leaningness of
I
having
think you
Monreal?
probably wouldn't, actually. You would probably be choosing, would you not? You wouldn't, you'd have Koscielny as a centre-back, you'd have Bellerin on the right. Who would be my first preference on the left? It would be Monreal. But I guess that if Monreal were not on the left, you'd probably put Kolasinac there, would you not?
I think that would be the natural choice.
But, as between the two of them, I would go for Monreal first.
Well, of course, you don't put Ballon d'Or winners on the prospective Ballon d'Or winners on the bench. You just don't. We have another question.
Okay.
Oh, yep. Sorry, I didn't know if we were done. From Jonas, what do you make of Emery's energy on the touchline during games? It seems to have an impact on the team and the fans. Is this something we've been missing and could benefit from in the future? John?
I love it. I love that display of energy. I love that demeanour. I love his comportment at the side of the pitch. The trouble is anything you say is always interpreted as a criticism of someone else, and we all know that wasn't Arsene Wenger's approach. Yeah. Arsene Wenger did his talking with the team before the match, and it is said that he was a man of relatively few words even at half-time. That was his approach. His approach had a lot more success as manager than failure. But, I sometimes felt when we were struggling in matches that, it would be great to have a display of passion and energy and counsel, advice, and gesticulation, noise in the form of
passion,
proffered advice by voice, but also gesticulation, pointing this way and that, and utter engagement with the game. So I love seeing that in Emery. I was a big admirer of Arsene Wenger, but all good things come to an end, and I've been hugely impressed by both some of the very shrewd substitutions that Emery has made, and by the way in which he has almost literally thrown himself into every game from start to finish. So do I think that it's some sort of gesture or exhibitionism, or do I think it's for real, and do I think it has an impact? I think it has a real impact, both upon the team and upon the morale of the fans.
Absolutely. So we have two kind of categories of questions left. And I want to ask you, because I know that you have places to go and people to see, and we're approaching the end of our time together. One of them probably in and of itself might take 3 or 4 minutes to answer. The other is a raft of questions that are all kind of rapid fire.
Okay.
Would you prefer the raft?
I don't
the question,
mind.
or
No,
both?
I'll try to do both. And I'll just have to run faster to get to my dinner engagement. But let me try to accommodate you.
Okay.
You ask, and I'll try to answer.
We'll start with the rapid fire first, and if we have time left,
Okay.
we'll go to the other one. As speaker, we need you to provide a official rule. All these questions, by the way, are from our very good friend, the Speaker of the House of Alamo City Arsenal Supporters Club, Mr. David Ziegler, former guest on the podcast. As Speaker, we need you to provide an official ruling on a very hotly contested debate. Like we said, Dave's a good friend of ours. He's a huge fan of the Arsenal, but somehow he is also a big fan of having pineapple on pizza.
Oh, God.
Having pineapple
on pizza. For some reason, we still remain friends with him reluctantly, even despite that. And I have to say, my son had a friend over the other night. We ordered pizza. He's actually English. He's a West Ham supporter, and his family, they moved over here about 7 or 8 years ago. And so we got half cheese, and then Ian's half was half pineapple. And I
can't hold it against him too much as he's a West Ham fan. My senior parliamentary caseworker, who's sitting not very far from me, is herself a dedicated West Ham fan, but we've never allowed it to spoil our
They're the real thing.
relationship.
His dad was an ex-professional cricketer, and so I mean they're real West Ham. But we have a good time with each other. But the pineapple thing kind of turned me off. He's never sleeping over again. Should people who object to pineapple on pizza be barred from entering the UK?
No,
Let me rephrase that. What do you think about pineapple on pizza?
I don't think people who advocate its removal or disapprove of people who have pineapple on pizza, I don't think that such people should be barred from coming to the UK. But if you ask me where am I on the subject of pineapple on pizza, I'm against it. For me, pizzas should be hot and spicy and have a bit of
manliness
punch to them. And that seems to me to be incompatible with pineapple. Pineapple is lovely and it's sweet, but for me it doesn't go with pizza.
I like pineapple. I like pizza. I like David Ziegler. I just don't think any of them should be together.
If I'm reading between the lines, David Ziegler is no longer allowed in the UK. Next question.
which is good because he just had a couple weeks there, and that ought to hold him for a while until he gets over this pineapple issue. All right, next question. Go ahead.
Do members of Parliament ever get together for pickup football matches? If so, can you say who are the best and worst players?
Forgive me, I missed that. I didn't hear that clearly. Just say that again.
Do members of Parliament ever get together for pickup football matches? And if so, can you say who are the best and worst players?
I don't know much about who the best and worst players are, is the honest answer. What I can tell you is that Ed Balls, who was at one time a Labour cabinet minister and has now left Parliament and is doing other things, was regarded as a very competitive footballer, and let's say he was judged to be robust and unforgiving in the tackle. And that I remember. There was a guy called Jim Murphy, who was a senior Labour politician who was regarded as a very good footballer and very fit, and the former Conservative sports minister who recently resigned from her post, Tracy Crouch, and is herself a qualified football coach, and so I respect her greatly and I like her very much, but she does suffer from one appalling character defect and amongst her many attributes, and that is, I'm afraid, she's a Tottenham fan.
Can diving in the Premier League be criminalized or at least made worthy of an ASBO for serial offenders? And then I added in there Zaha, Dele Alli, Son, and to be fair, Guendouzi.
Well, I'm not going to comment on any of the individuals.
Yes,
I certainly don't think it should be criminalized. I'm not going to comment on the individuals or say whether I think that they're diving merchants. I don't think it should be criminalized. But, on a serious note, it is a big offence because simulation is an attempt to pull a fast one. It's an attempt to deceive. It is the wrong thing to do. So although we might now and again joke about it, it is actually in the interests of the game to clamp down on it, whoever the suspected culprit is. And should we clamp down on it pretty firmly? Yes, I think we should, because it is a very bad offence.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it can completely decide a game and a season and a cup and all of that.
And you might think, oh, well, if it works for you, isn't that fun? But there'll be other times when it will work against your team. And the real question, without being too pompous about it, but being modestly pompous about it, is it right or is it wrong? And the answer is, we all know, it's plain wrong.
Right. Yeah, you're right.
John, another question from David. What is your favorite Westminster area pub, or what pub do you highly recommend for Americans coming over to the UK to have a drink in?
I think I would recommend a pub called the Two Chairmen in Westminster. I think that's a good and fun pub. And if you wanted a pub that's very, very, very close to the House of Commons, and you might well not, but if you want one really close to the House of Commons, I would say the Red Lion is a well-regarded pub, a very well-regarded pub. The more touristy pub, I don't mean that in a rude way, but a pub probably frequented by more tourists is St. Stephen's Tavern. But of those three that I've mentioned, I'd go for the Two Chairmen.
Beautiful. I will check it out the next time I'm there. Which takes longer? Again, this is not our question. This is David. We're going to throw him under the bus. Which takes longer? A question to the Prime Minister from Dennis Skinner, or Paul Pogba's tap dancing penalty kick run up?
Well, it's a close run thing, but I would say that a question from Dennis takes longer, and for the avoidance of doubt, and unless this is misrepresented, or in case it be misrepresented by some willfully malicious soul, I'm not criticizing Dennis, and if Dennis were out of order, as he has from time to time been, then I would say so. But I would say, on the whole, his question will be considerably longer than
The penalty
Pogba's tab dancing run-up, because a good full long question from Dennis could well take a minute, and I think that's quite a bit longer than Pogba's penalty kick run-up.
His longest one ever is 45 seconds, I think.
I think Skinner has the edge. Dennis has the edge.
Excellent. Speaking of order, did you ever find yourself accidentally shouting order? And I'm not going to even attempt to do it the right way, but order at matches instead of cheering or booing.
No, it's curious that I don't, but I don't. I do sometimes express my frustration with the paucity of the referee, and so I have been known to nod approvingly when Arsenal fans have started chanting, "You don't know what you're doing." Right. But have I ever called out order? No, I haven't. What I have often found is that in going to football matches, people call out order at me. When they see me, people often call out order. I mean, I always say, I'm not important at all, other than I hope to my wife and family, but the office of Speaker is obviously a very well-known office, and simply because Parliament is televised, one's recognition rating is greater than it was before one served as Speaker. So quite often at football matches I meet people and they will say order, or people call out to me from a distance, order. Do I find myself lapsing into yelling order? No, but I do quite a lot of yelling at Arsenal matches. If you think, do I just sort of sit there meek and quiet and reserved, the answer is no. I cheer very loudly, and when we got the 4-2 victory over Tottenham a couple of weeks ago, I was with some friends. I was seated with some friends in a box, and I turned round to the person behind me, and we embraced, and I jumped up and down, and I lifted my son in the air, and so on. So, do you know what I mean? You've got this image, very often Americans, of the stiff upper lip Englishman sitting there with great self-control and reserve. Well, stuff that. When I'm at Arsenal matches, I get really seriously excited.
As it should be. Beautiful.
So we have a couple more questions.
Please.
Would my right honourable friend, the Speaker, agree that Arsenal are, in fact, the greatest team the world has ever seen?
That question doesn't even need to be asked.
I know, but he put it on there, so
is obvious.
I'm texting with him right now.
Unarguable, factual proposition that Arsenal are by far the greatest team the world has ever seen.
Beautiful. Awesome. Now who is the most, we should have finished with that one, honestly. Who's the most non-obvious, like not including Henry, Bergkamp, Adams, Vieira, who's the most non-obvious former player that you would like to have in your squad, in this squad in their prime, or that you just, that has a place in your heart, not because they were necessarily the talisman of the team, but just for who they were?
That's a good question.
Wow. That's really difficult. I would say, in terms of an inspirational talent, the player that I would name, besides those you've mentioned, would be Liam Brady. I thought Liam Brady was a stunning player for Arsenal in the 1970s, a magical talent with an extraordinary gift, and I would want to have him in my ideal Arsenal team. And I think in terms of overall quality as a defender and leadership skill, I would take, above anybody else probably, Tony Adams.
Yeah. And Andy and I just texted each other to throw this to each other. Andy, who are you going with?
In this current squad, I would have went with Edu.
And my answer to this question, I've been asked this question before, and my answer is always the same. David Rocastle.
David Rocastle. Okay, well, a great player. The tragedy of his loss will never be forgotten.
When you know what he meant to so many other people, I mean, just reading reading Alan Smith's book and finding that, just the man was clearly one of a kind. And the last one, Andy, you got this one.
Yeah, the main founder and first captain of Arsenal, David Danskin, is buried in an unmarked grave in Coventry. The club is remedying that early in the new year with a proper tribute and a proper memorial Will the speaker be attending the ceremony?
Wow. I mean, I saw this question, and the honest answer is I don't know, because I have no idea whether I'll be invited. I answer slightly hesitantly. I wasn't aware of it until I saw the question, so I'm not going to try to hoodwink you, both because that would be unethical and because it wouldn't succeed. You would see through it. I'm not going to try to hoodwink you into saying, oh yes, it was very much part of my plan to go. It wasn't, and I've no idea when exactly it will be, or whether it will be compatible with work obligations, and indeed, for that matter, whether I would even be invited. But does it interest me from what you've told me? It does.
Excellent. Well,
because I like paying respects to my club. I love my club, and I spend a disproportionate amount of time probably watching and thinking about Arsenal. But I tell you guys, to me, it's really important to get away from the hurly-burly of Westminster and political engagement, much as I enjoy it, and to indulge passions. And for me, a key passion is supporting Arsenal. And so it's very rare for me to take the attitude, oh, well, I can't go to that game. Occasionally, unavoidably, I just can't make a game. There have been 2 occasions this season, one when I had to attend an important service to mark the 100th anniversary of the First World War, and that meant I couldn't be at an Arsenal match. I make no complaint about that. And there was one occasion when I was abroad and I missed a home game, a Carabao Cup game, I think the game against Brentford. But I didn't miss a single home game last season, and I'm loath to miss any more home games this season. And I try to go with my son to half a dozen or more away games. And if I can finish on this note, it's been a joy and a privilege to be interviewed by you guys. And I love Arsenal today, and I'll love Arsenal tomorrow, and I'll love Arsenal for as long as I have breath in my lungs.
Well, thank you. Thank you so
we
much.
We appreciate your time.
I think it's a great place to cut off. And if there's one passion I have almost as much as Arsenal, it's dinner plans. And we know that you have those. And I would never keep you from something that I hold so passionate.
Bless
So it's been a true honor to speak with you. We normally ask kind of where you can be found online and that sort of thing, but I don't think that really applies here. You're not necessarily promoting anything or writing on the newspaper, but I have been a very interested party in watching proceedings in Parliament, and you're a large part of that. I enjoy your humor and certainly finding out you're an Arsenal supporter was made it very much interesting for me to be able to reach out and talk to you. So thank you for our wonderful.
Thank you.
Oh, it's been our pleasure.
Thanks
to our users.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Keep in touch, and you make the generous offer to me that if I'm in the States, I should look you up, and perhaps I can say to you, if you guys are in London and you want to make contact, it would be a pleasure to hear from you.
Yeah, I'll be back in May or August, so I'll definitely take you up on that. I'm trying to persuade my wife for August since we'll be in season.
You make contact. Bless you both. Take care. Good luck to you both.
Thank you very much.
Cheers.
And come on, you Gooners.
Okay. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Cool.
All right. Well, thanks for listening, and we will be back next week. Come on, you Gooners.